For those of you I have not had a chance to meet yet, my name is Mark Fenner. I'm a scaling up coach and strategist. I'm based in Dallas, Texas. I'm the founder of Rise Performance Group. I'm also a certified scaling up coach and strategist. I would say 95% of my work today really revolves around the scaling up performance platform, helping teams take advantage of that platform to scale their companies. But I'm supplemented by the work I've done over my career with John Maxwell, with Pat Lencioni, as well as a number of others. So it's truly a privilege to be here, to be able to serve you today. I think this topic is extremely important. And I'm going to drop in the chat one more time a link to the worksheets. The new people who come in don't get to see the worksheets or the chat that was there before they signed in. And so I apologize for those of you that have been on for a while, but I'm going to keep posting that through the first couple minutes so that people can get that worksheet downloaded. Also, at the end, there will be an evaluation. Your feedback just means the world to me. It helps me get better. It helps me learn what connected, what didn't. So if you would honor me by taking 2 minutes to give me some feedback in that evaluation, I'll honor you by giving you a copy of the slides, and you can take this and use it with your team as you best see fit. So let's jump in. So welcome to the 4 steps to create your flywheel, your virtuous cycle of momentum. And it was 3 years ago that I did the first webinar on this topic. And since then, I've helped dozens of companies develop their flywheels. And the results that have come from these exercises has been nothing short of extraordinary. As a result, I believe this is a must-have strategy tool. And I was inspired 3 years ago. You might remember we were in the middle of the pandemic, and a writer for Fortune magazine named Brian Dumaine wrote a book called Bezonomics. And in that book, he told the Amazon story. And a big part of the Amazon story is around how they adopted Jim Collins' concept of the flywheel. And it so inspired Jim that he came out shortly thereafter and published a monograph. But the flywheel concept was first talked about in the book Good to Great, which was published in 2001. And many of you may remember that Amazon came out as a high-flying tech stock and then about crashed and burned during the tech bust of 2001 and 2002. In fact, the financial press was calling Amazon .bomb. I mean, they had all but written them off. And frustrated by this, Jeff Bezos brought in Jim Collins to work with him and his board to say, are we missing the next big thing? Should we be pivoting? Should we be doing something different, right? Kind of a common response that we all go through when things aren't going as we would like them. But Jim Collins really encouraged them to take a step back and to think about what is generating momentum or what could generate momentum in their organization, and had them work on this idea of creating a flywheel. And I'm going to share with you that original flywheel. But if you go into Amazon today, there's not a department within Amazon that doesn't have a flywheel. In fact, the flywheel is not only applicable at the company level, but it's also applicable at the business unit level, at the department level. I would argue it's applicable at the individual level. So I'm really excited to share with you these steps and what I've learned over the last 3 years of working with my clients to really embrace this concept of the flywheel. And as many of you know, the rest, as they say, is history with Amazon. I mean, they've come out today. Amazon's one of the most valuable companies in the world. Jeff Bezos is one of the most wealthy people in the world. And if you look at that line, I wish I could have gone all the way back to 02, but you can see just how flat they rode. And then it just finally, that momentum has taken off for Amazon. And that's why a lot of people say momentum is magic, right? And most people get momentum, right? We see it in sports. We see it in business. We get momentum. The challenge is, how do we create it in a business in a business environment. And that's what I'm going to show you today. That's what you're going to learn. But momentum is magic. I like to say that with momentum, even big problems seem small, but without momentum, even small problems seem big. And I love the analogy of the train sitting on the tracks, right? And you got a train sitting on the tracks. I can take a tiny little piece of wood and chalk it in front of that wheel, and that train's never going to get going. It's stuck. That little problem has that train stuck. But get that train up to, I don't know, 5, 10, 15, 20 miles an hour. You put that little chalk in front of it, it doesn't even feel it. In fact, you could build a wood wall, boom, it'd go right through it. In fact, I'd argue you get that train up to 30, 35 miles an hour, you could build a concrete steel reinforced wall and boom, that train would go right through that wall. And so momentum is the same thing in business. You know, when we don't have momentum, I mean, even a little chalk of wood can hold you back, but get momentum, right? And even big problems now seem insurmountable. They seem like tiny little bumps in the road. And here's how Jim explains it in his book. And he said this, he said, no matter how dramatic the end result, and I think you'd have to argue that Amazon's results have been pretty dramatic, but no matter how dramatic the end result, good to great transformations never happen in one fell swoop. In building a great company, there is no single defining action, no grand program, no one killer innovation, no solitary lucky break, no miracle moment. Rather, the process resembles relentlessly pushing a giant, heavy flywheel, turn upon turn, building momentum until a point of breakthrough and beyond. And that's what's so powerful when you look at that Amazon chart. And it's not limited to Amazon. Look at how long it took Apple to get to their first $1 billion valuation, 30 some years. They got 2 billion like a year later, 3 billion a year and a half after that. It's the momentum is so big now, you couldn't stop those companies if you wanted to. It resembles, for those of you old like me, you might remember these, you know, when we had playgrounds, we had these things we got on, the merry-go-rounds, and there'd always be some big kid that would push that merry-go-round, right? Or maybe 2 or 3. And it'd take a lot of work, and they'd huff and puff, and they'd finally get it going and spinning and spinning and spinning. Then they'd jump on and everybody'd ride. And it's similar in building the business. It's a lot of work in the beginning, but if we've got a process, if we've articulated the levers, we accelerate how quick we can get the momentum. We remove the potential barriers to momentum, those things that could cause friction in your business, so that that momentum can help you push to breakthrough and beyond. So today, you're going to come out of this time together with clarity on how to turn your flywheel. You're going to learn 4 steps. I'm going to take you through the 4 steps. In fact, if you have not printed the worksheet, I'm going to drop it in chat one more time for the new people. Grab it, try to print it, because I'm going to encourage you to go through and just think and put stuff on that worksheet, or at least in your notes. But you're going to learn the steps, and you can go back and work on them and refine them after today. But my hope is you leave here with a first draft of your flywheel. And everybody that's on this call that's serious about building their business, you should be able to leave here with a first draft of your flywheel. I'm going to give you examples of current clients and the flywheels we've created. And you're going to gain an understanding of why this virtuous cycle of momentum is just so doggone important for you to embrace and to share within your organization. So let's jump in. I'm going to start with Amazon. I'm going to go back to Amazon. And this was their first flywheel when Jim Collins came in. And it started with this concept back in the day of offering lower prices on more offerings. And they felt like if they could do that, then they could not help but increase customer visits to their website. And if they could increase customer visits to the website, they could not help but attract third-party sellers. And if they attracted third-party sellers, they could not help but expand the store and extend distribution. And if they did that, they could not help but grow revenues per fixed costs, which would make it easier for them to lower prices on more offerings, and the flywheel turns again. Very, very, very simple, very powerful. If you think about it, at the time, every employee within Amazon could align to some element on that flywheel. And if they were doing something that created friction against that flywheel, they got rid of it. It's a simple, simple way to explain strategy. So let's take a look at this in a little bit deeper context. Notice that I said the terms between each element, you can't help but. It's just a good test. If we do this, we can't help but, right? It's a good lead to the next element in the flywheel. And then notice at the top, after the last element, I said it'll make it easier to do the thing at the top. So if it can pass just that simple test as you put it together, we can't help but, and it's going to make it easier to do the thing at the top, that's a great start to your flywheel. You'll also notice that on the right, and pay attention to this as I go through other examples, but on the right, it's about delivering on your value prop, right? So how are you benefiting your customers? How are you benefiting the market? How are you benefiting society? And then on the left, it tends to be, how do we capture and redeploy the fuel within the company? So a couple foundational principles, as you look at these examples, I want you to be thinking about and say, does that match up with what Mark said on the previous slide? So here, lower prices on more offerings. We can't help but increase customer visits. We can't help but attract more third-party sellers. We can't help but expand the store, extend distribution. We can't help but grow revenues per fixed costs. And if we do that, it's going to make it easier to offer lower prices on more offerings, and the flywheel spins. Let me give you some other examples. Many of you are familiar with Vanguard, the low-cost mutual fund company. Simple flywheel, offer lower cost mutual funds. If they do that, they can't help but deliver superior long-term returns for their customers or their clients. If they do that, they can't help but build strong client loyalty. If they do that, they can't help but grow assets under management. If they do that, they can't help but generate economies of scale, making it easier to offer lower cost mutual funds. Now, notice an important element at the top of the flywheel as well. This tends to be something that's certainly most within your influence as a company, if not within your control. So this is a way to get the team waking up every day on, how do we offer lower cost mutual funds? And then how do we deliver superior long-term returns? So you think about the staff at Vanguard, they're waking up every day focusing on those. How do we build strong client loyalty? Anything that's a nit or that's keeping us from building that loyalty, we want to get rid of. We're going to measure it, we're going to manage, we're going to bonus to it, but we want loyal customers. And if we do that, we're going to grow assets under management. We can measure that, and then generating the economies of scale as a way for us to redeploy the fuel to be able to, again, continue to offer lower cost mutual funds. Now, Intel is an interesting story. It kind of follows my model, but it deviates slightly. So look at the top, design new chips that customers crave. So core competency of Intel, something that they certainly influence, if not control. And if they do that, they can't help but have pricing power. So their idea here is, we want to price high before the competition catches up. See, Intel sells something that's the equivalent of ice. Right after they make it, it starts melting away. And their time to capture the market is small because of the way the chip market works. So they designed their flywheel to say, so we want to design great chips that are in demand. We want to seize the pricing power while we have it, while simultaneously driving down unit costs. And if we do that, we can't help but harvest profits even as the prices are falling. And if we do that, we can't help but be able to reinvest those profits into more research and development, making it easier to design new chips that customers crave. And I love the insight and the thinking that went into this, because it's kind of two elements in that flywheel. We want pricing power, but we also want to drive costs out, right? We don't want to get lazy because of the pricing power. So it's a great way for the CEO to really communicate our strategy. And where do you align as an employee along this flywheel? How do you help us push the flywheel? Let's look at a couple others, and then I'll get into the 4 steps. Here's one, Euro. These folks make the helmets, the cycling helmets, hugely successful company. Look at theirs. It starts with invent great products, right? Very much what they control. If they invent great helmets, they can't help but get elite athletes to use them. If they get elite athletes to use them, they can't help but inspire weekend warriors. If they inspire weekend warriors, they can't help but attract mainstream customers. If they attract mainstream customers, they can't help but build branding power. If they do that, they can't help but have pricing power in the channel and profits that they can reinvest in R&D. Again, making it easier to invent great products, and the flywheel turns again and again and again. You're seeing, hopefully, how simple this is, how every employee in your company should be able to grasp this and understand it. It just becomes a powerful way of communicating your strategy and getting the team aligned with how do we create momentum. This is Cleveland Clinic. Now, notice a difference here. Theirs starts with get the right medical professionals. So it doesn't start with what I would think might be their core competency, but certainly hiring right is certainly within their control, if not their influence. But theirs starts with let's get the right medical professionals. If we do that, we can't help but cultivate a collaborative, patient-centric culture. If we do that, we can't help but work across specialties for best health outcomes. A big constraint in the industry, right, is the siloization. Departments not talking to each other. They're looking to develop an X factor by going after that with their flywheel. If they work across specialties, they can't help but attract patients from around the world. If they attract patients from around the world, they can't help but have a resource engine with plenty of fuel. And if they do that, they can't help but be able to invest in the best facilities, research, and people, making it easier to attract, hire, and onboard the right medical professionals, and the flywheel turns again. So let's jump into the 4 steps. Again, take a look at the worksheet that I passed out and either get it up on your screen. You can take notes beside it, or if you've been able to print it, that would be great. But I've really boiled this down into 4 steps. When I originally rolled this out, I had 7, and I just thought, Mark, this is just such a simple concept. Let's make it even easier. And so the first step starts with reviewing or developing, if you don't have it, the 3 circles of your hedgehog concept. And I've got those on the worksheet. I'm going to take you through this idea, but this is another idea, another concept that Jim really drove in his book, Good to Great. So there's been a lot written on this, but I'm going to take you through developing your hedgehog here in a minute. Number 2, identify the components and sketch your flywheel. This can really be simple. And again, my hope is that you just trust this webinar and you leave with a rough draft of what you think your flywheel is coming out of this call. And there's no reason you shouldn't be able to do that. Number 3, refine to no more than 6 components. And I've got some questions here to help you think through that. And then number 4, test the flywheel against a list of successes and disappointments, and get out and share it. And does it make logical sense? So before I take you through the steps, I'm going to give you just a couple of other examples, but I want to make this point from Jim. He said a flywheel need not be entirely unique. Okay, so some of these examples you're going to see, God, man, that's pretty good. I could maybe borrow some stuff there, and that's fine, because 2 successful organizations can have similar flywheels. But what matters most is how well you understand your unique flywheel and how well you execute on each component over a long series of iterations. So what I've learned is that each step needs to be important, right? Think of the kid pushing the merry-go-round, right? They need to have something to hold. This needs to be a push. We need to align the team behind these steps where they're waking up every day saying, this is my role in pushing the flywheel. Each step should be measurable. Make sure you can celebrate wins at each step, because those little micro wins create more momentum. And activities that don't accelerate the flywheel are friction. So if you remember the merry-go-round, we'd be, the big kids are pushing the merry-go-round. There'd always be some smart aleck with his foot out there dragging in the dirt. And that foot in the dirt is the friction. We want to find the friction in your organization and get rid of it, right? So we get that flywheel spinning as quickly as we can. And so I'm going to take you to a client of mine. We developed this flywheel back right during the pandemic. And Sidekick Operators is a unique company that brings a blend of consulting with access to growth capital to help companies scale. And they generate transformational results for their clients. And we did this over a Zoom call back in the day. And you'll see their hedgehog here. And it starts with what can they be best at, which is building world-class service organizations. What are they most passionate about? Notice it says the service professional. It doesn't say service technicians, doesn't say frontline employees. It's the service professional. And what drives their economic engine is the number of service professionals employed. And what is their BHAG, which sits at the middle of that, which is their big, hairy, audacious goal? It's 20,000 service professionals that are working in their portfolio companies. And I remember when we were going through this and I was talking to Phil Miner, who is the founder of Sidekick. He'd already scaled one very successful business. And when we were talking about economic engine, I kept coming back to return on assets or EBITDA. And I just remember him getting animated and slamming his fist down literally on his desk at his house down in New Braunfels. Again, this is during the pandemic. He's like, Mark, we're about the service professional. We take care of the service professional. Everything else is going to take care of itself. And we flip our organizational chart up. We give them the best trucks, the best training, the best equipment, the best systems. We put them in the position to win. And when we do that, A-player talent collapses around our organization. And that's how we win. So it's all about the service professional. And I thought, wow. And I got to tell you, in the last 3-4 years of working with them, I've just seen Phil walk that talk in every customer that he deals with, every interaction. So it's not just something we made up because it sounded good, because it's coming from the heart. So as we started on what drives their process, I said, start with what you're most in control of. And so they started with this 8-step unique process they have of how they work with clients. And they said, if we do that, we can't help but generate superior results. And if we do that, we can't help but build the brand equity of Sidekick Operators. If we do that, we can't help but, build more A-players, attract more A-players to our company, which, will help us serve more customers. And as we started going through the wins and losses, the successes and where they haven't been as successful, it all came back to what's most important is that right fit customer. If we don't have a client that values people the way that we value people, then it's just hard for us to implement our 8-step process. And so we kind of rotated this thing a little bit, and that's been at the top. And I'll tell you, we've been pounding this flywheel for the last 3 years. And I'd love for Phil to be on here and talk about the results that they've been able to generate. Here's another client of mine, Lone Star Communications. Their graphics company or their graphics department took and kind of built on the flywheel concept. But you can see what they want to be best at is strategically solving problems in healthcare. We're really getting more and more clarity on that. It's really solving the most important and strategic problems in healthcare. What they're passionate about is making communities safer. And communities are not safe when you've got falls, when you've got infection rates that are above the norm and that are not in control in these big hospitals. It's a big, big, big challenge. And they're centered on solving that problem for their customers. And what drives their economic engine is, recurring revenue, right? It's that ARR, that annual recurring revenue. So let's look at their flywheel. So we started at the top with what they're most in control of, which is delivering outstanding solutions. So outstanding is a term that means a lot to their founder, and outstanding means significantly above anybody else. We stand out because of the quality of our solutions. And if we do that, we can't help but attract influential clients. And if you run a list of the top 10 hospital networks in the South, down here in Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, you'll see they own the majority of those the biggest and the best hospital networks. And their goal is to ultimately control the whole country, but that's a whole nother story. But attract elite, influential clients. If they do that, they can't help but create clients for life. If they do that, they can't help but grow recurring revenue and increase their branding power. If they do that, they can't help but be able to invest in people and products. If they do that, they can't help but attract A-player talent, making it easier for them to deliver outstanding solutions. In this concept, again, I just want to go back to the simplicity. I was on the phone with the CEO, Ray Bailey, yesterday. He'd come from an industry event with the best of the best that are in their space. They're collaborating on projects around the country. And he said, Mark, I took the flywheel out and walked him through the flywheel. Now, this is 6 CEOs of all of the best and the brightest in this space. And he said, I walked him through this flywheel. He goes, they were blown away by the flywheel. And they're like, where do you get that? How could we develop that? And he goes, so I sent him to your website, which I'm like, way to go, Ray. But the other cool thing is not only is this a simple way for them to communicate their strategy, but you can see where they're gaining more elite, influential clients. You can see some of the hires they've made over the last 2 years that are world-class. They're bringing in world-class talent to help them deliver on this idea of solving healthcare's most challenging and important problems. And it's driving the company, it's driving the energy, and it's driving their economic engine. Here's another client of mine out of Houston, Cougar Sales. We started with them. I mean, what they want to be best at is providing the most trusted water control solution. So if you go into a big hospital or a big high rise, Cougar's probably got their hands on the water systems that get everything up and down, from the drinking water to the plumbing to the evaporators that keep the building cool. And what they're most passionate about is being the trusted partner in this idea of high performance buildings. So this is a set of words they want to own. It's a strategy that they're driving. And then what drives their economic engine are Cougar believers and Cougar high performance buildings. And so they've put their BHAG on the number of high performance buildings. They're creating a standard around that. We're measuring that. And that's what's driving their economic engine. So if you look at their flywheel, it starts with attract the best people and deliver the best solutions. So that's number one. If they do that, they can't help but increase trust and evangelism. If they do that, they can't help but create these Cougar believers. And I mean, their CEO has gone in and created a chart and gotten super clear on how we define these Cougar believers. And everybody in the company can tell, is that a Cougar believer or not? And if not, what do we need to do to push that flywheel and get that person to be a Cougar believer? And if they do that, they can't help but win more basis of design projects. So what puts friction on their flywheel is when they get relegated to bid work, when they're one of 5 companies submitting a bid and it's low cost and people are sharpening their pencils and spreadsheets. They want to work with and consult and deliver great solutions because they've got trust and commitment from the customers. And when they do that, they can't help but have increased revenue and higher margins. And when they do that, they can't have money to reinvest, which makes it easier to attract best people and deliver the best solutions. And the cool thing at Cougar, I'll tell you, I started with them. It'll be 2 years in June. When I did my first meeting, one of the exercises I like to do is talk about what would it take to double the company. and they had been flat, stagnant, not really generating the kind of money that they need to generate to be able to invest back in the business. And they said, Mark, we just can't see line of sight to doubling this any less than 5 years. So it was a 2026 goal. So we put a 2026 goal to double the company. We got this flywheel in place and we started pushing the flywheel. And I was just with them a couple weeks ago. They booked first quarter sales is already about 20% ahead of the plan to deliver on the 5-year number in 2023. It'll be 3 years earlier than we originally decided just a year and a half ago, and solid bottom line profitability numbers and growing gross margin percentage. And the CFO looked over at me and he said, Mark, the reason we're seeing so much success is because of the relentless focus on the flywheel. Again, it's so simple. It's almost so simple people don't get it. It just get it, communicate it, get your team embracing it, and let the results start to be delivered for you and your company. So let's go through the worksheet. I've given you some examples. Let's start with this hedgehog. This is where I always start. And even if a company's got it, I like to go revisit this. But so write down, what are you deeply passionate about? I told you that Phil was deeply passionate about the service professional. I told you that Cougar, they were deeply passionate about this idea of high performance buildings. I mean, that's what gets them excited, right? That's what gives them energy. Ray and his team at Lone Star, they're passionate about solving the most important challenges and problems in healthcare. What is it? What is it for you? I mean, what do you think it is? Just write in your notes what you think it is. I mean, you know what you're passionate about. Write it down. Now, I've got some questions I'm going to leave you with, and I've got some questions in the worksheet that if you struggle on this, in a small portion of the clients I work with kind of struggle around this, but there's 3 exercises you can do. One is the why does your work matter exercise, and it's anchored in this 5 whys. So what do you do? Why does that matter? Why is that important? Why is it important? Why does it matter? And kind of walking through that 5 times, and eventually at number 4, number 5, you kind of hit on it. Another great question is, why were you originally founded? Usually a company is founded, and if you founded it, you may know this. If you didn't found it, go find the founder and ask him why it was founded. Or number 3, and Jim talks about this in Good to Great, or in his monograph too, but what indelible hole would be left in society if your company failed to exist? And the exercise is called the random corporate serial killer. You can have some fun with your team and have them go through that, or you can bring somebody like me in to help you go through that. But the idea is, what indelible hole would be left in society if your company failed to exist? All these are designed to get you off of your P&L, get you off of making money, and thinking about what's the real value and purpose for our existence. The second question is, what can you be best in the world at? And the idea here is, if you're a football player, you could say, well, I'm going to be the best football player. But to really succeed as a football player, you need to say, what part of football am I going to really excel at? And if I'm a kicker, I'm going to wake up every day saying, how do I get better at kicking longer and with more accuracy? And if I think I'm a quarterback, if I've been gifted with those skills, I'm going to wake up every day saying, how can I throw the ball further and with better accuracy? I'm probably, if I'm a quarterback, I'm not going to spend time kicking field goals. And if I'm a kicker, I'm probably not going to spend time throwing pass routes at practice. So the idea here is, let's get focused on what you can be best at. Now, some clients kind of struggle with this idea of being best in the world. And so just think, what could you be best at? Or what skills do you have, or competencies do you have that are worth investing in, right? What differentiates you? I like this question down here. What could we do better than anyone else? Where are we developing differentiation? Again, if you think you got kicking skills, the coach is going to have you work on refining those skills. If you got a strong arm and you can throw fairly accurate, the coach is probably going to have you focus on that and get better at that. So this is about really developing where your strengths are. And then the third question, so write down, what can you be best at? So just write that down. Many of you know it, just write it down. It doesn't need to be right, doesn't need to be perfect. Just what comes to your mind, write it down on your sheet. And then the third question around this idea of the hedgehog is what drives your economic engine? And what you'd like, I like the question, what would you like more of? Is it more clients, more sales, more contracts, more employees? And you can see, Sidekicks was kind of related around this idea of more service professionals. Lone Stars was more around the type of contracts they'd like to have. Cougars was around more of the types of clients. These are the types of clients that we really want to serve. Again, work on this economic engine. I'll tell you, sometimes this one takes a few iterations to get right. But the idea of the hedgehog is we're looking for that intersection in the middle that it all makes logical sense. If we focus on what we can be best in the world at, it fuels our passion and it fuels our economic engine at the same time. But in the beginning, in the spirit of let's get it down and then get it right, I just get down what's in your heart, what you think that answer should be, and then we can go from there. So you should have those three filled out. What are we most passionate about? What can we be best at? And what drives our economic engine? Next, we want to identify the components of the flywheel. And I recommend you just take that idea of what can we be best at and put that in as number one. And just set that in at the top. And let's start there. And then start filling. If you do that, you can't help but, what would be the next thing that you couldn't help but? And it's probably going to have something to do with clients. Remember, on the right side, we want to think about how are we improving clients in society. And then if you do that, what can you not help but? And if we do that, we can't help but. And then as we get over here, we want to think about how are you capturing and redeploying the fuel? So a way to think about that is, are we building brand? Are we building branding power? See, when you've got a solid brand, and by the way, a brand is nothing more than a reputation. A brand is like a lubricant. It makes it easier to sell, right? Customers are attracted to you because of your reputation. And it makes it easier for you to hold fair pricing. You're not succumbing to low-cost provider to win business. And for most of you on the call, low-cost provider is not your strategy, right? You're bringing unique and valuable services or capabilities. And so you need to price to be able to bring that differentiation to the market, and brand helps you do that. So if we have brand, then we generate the profits that make it easier for us to do what's at the top, which is probably what you're made for or what you can be best at. So I encourage you to just start there and let's sketch it out and start seeing what it looks like. So sketch in right here on the worksheet, what can you be best at? And if you do that, you can't help but think about the impact that's going to have on your customers. And if you do that, you can't help but think about the momentum that can start building through your brand. And if you have a strong brand, you can't help but, what would you do with the excess profits or the excess pricing power that you get as a result of having a strong brand? And would that make it easier for you to deliver on what's at the top of your flywheel? See, this can really just be such a simple exercise. So get those sketched in right now. I bet you already know what those are. And if you've got a bunch or you're putting too much in, we want to keep it to 6, ideally 5, but no more than 6 components. So the way we refine it is we start asking some questions. So if you continue to push the flywheel, is it going to create momentum, right? Are these logical links? Does this make sense? Does each element link to the other with the transitional phrase, we can't help but? And does the last element make it easier to do the first element at the top of the flywheel? And then the fourth bullet here, and this is where the successes and the disappointments really start to come in. Does it align with your successes? And I told you when we were working with Sidekick, it's like, oh my God, this is what's creating friction in our ability to create more great successes in our projects. It's this right fit customer. And when we don't get that right, we don't succeed. So that should be number one on our flywheel. So thinking about where have we seen success as a company and where have we seen disappointment, and do those align? When we see success, it's because we followed this logical cycle of momentum. And when we did not see success, it's because we deviated or something went wrong or some kid stuck his foot out. We created friction. We dropped the ball at some key point of our flywheel. That's what you're looking for the flywheel to help validate for you. And then number 4, and this is so important, is to test the flywheel against logic, successes, and failures. So, it's kind of a Fenner question, but I just love the question, does it pass the logic test? If I get up and say 2 + 2 = 5, you guys are going to look at me and say, Mark, that doesn't make logical sense, right? So does it pass the logic test for me? Does it pass the logic test for the executive team? But more importantly, when we get out and start sharing it in the field, does it pass the logic test? Number 2, does our experience validate it? This gets back to the successes and the failures. And then number 3, do others in the organization get it when you explain it to them? And I'll tell you, in the beginning, it may take a few iterations for you to get clear on it and for your team to get clear on it. I remember at Lone Star, the first couple quarters, they struggled. But the team, we had the kind of culture where they'd bring the feedback to the meeting. Mark, I just don't think this makes sense. And we'd work through it and help talk about it as a team. And now, as I mentioned, the CEO, Ray, is so excited. He's sharing it with people all over the place as their core strategy. And he's getting other people all excited about it because he's developed so much internal passion because, number 1, he understands it very, very well. Number 2, the organization is so committed to pushing it. And number 3, he's seeing the results that the flywheel is generating. So I want to share one more quick story before we wrap up. So start thinking about your questions because I'd be happy to take them. But this is a story, and Jim Collins talks about this in the monograph. But oftentimes people think the flywheel is only available to the top of the company. It's a company thing. And I think it's very much a departmental thing. I think it's very much an individual thing. And we should always be thinking about, what are the steps we're taking to build momentum in our careers? What are steps we're taking to build momentum with our people? What are steps we're taking to build momentum in our department? And so I think this story just is a great kind of out of the box way to think about it. So Deb was a principal of a school in Fort Riley, Kansas, and they were struggling to say the least. And when she came in, she documented a flywheel and started pushing the flywheel. And you see at the beginning, there were fewer than 35% had a proficiency rating on reading. It was a toxic atmosphere, high turnover, high student turnover, just a very challenging environment. And Deb sat back and put this flywheel together. And you can see 1 year, she bent the curve on reading proficiency, 5 years, bent it even more, and 18 years at the time of the writing, which was in 2000. She was 18 years into her career there, and she's still turning the flywheel. You can Google her name. There's been some publicity around what she's done with that school and the credit she gives back to the simplicity of the flywheel. But look at hers. Select teachers infused with passion. Right? I mean, just think about the simplicity of that, but the clarity that comes is saying, what teachers are going to be best for us? So notice it's not the smartest, it's not the most tenured. She wanted teachers that are passionate. Build a collaborative improvement team. If we do that, we can't help but assess student progress early and often. If we do that, we can't help but achieve learning with each and every kid. If we do that, we can't help but enhance our reputation as a great place to work, right? Here's the branding power that Deb was looking for within her school. If we do that, we can't help but replenish the passionate teacher pipeline, which makes it easier to select teachers that are infused with passion. You got a big pipeline of teachers that want to come to your school. You get the pick of the crop. If nobody knows about you and you're battling just to get people to come apply for your school, you're getting nothing. So just look at the simplicity and the logic in this model. I love it. And I want to leave you with one final statistic here that I think might help you. This is some research that was done by Strategy Ann, which is PricewaterhouseCoopers strategy division. They surveyed 4,000 executives around the world. And the stat that I want you to focus on is this 80% stat right here. And notice what they say. They say 80% of executives. So just think about this for a minute. This is 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10. This is what they're saying. Admit their strategy is not well understood by their teams. The ability to communicate strategy is so complex anymore that the teams don't get it. And I see it in my work. When I get outside of the executive team, and sometimes when I'm in the executive team, they don't understand it. They don't see how it's going to work. They don't see how it aligns with their goals. There's mass confusion. And if you want your team to help you scale big heights and hit a big, bold goal, I mean, isn't it obvious that everybody needs to understand which way to row the boat? And I want to argue that the flywheel is just a simple way to talk to your team about waking up every day and pushing that flywheel. And anytime we see friction in the flywheel, let's get it out of there, right? It's just a brilliant concept that, one, works, and two, helps to make your job so much easier when it comes to communicating strategy. So final takeaways. Momentum is magic, right? So let's get momentum. With momentum, big problems seem small. Without momentum, even little problems, like that little chunk of wood, seem so big. So let's create a passion and an energy to go generate momentum for ourselves, in our department, in our district or region, and for our companies. Number 2, focus your team on the elements that create momentum, right? That's what we've been talking about. Number 3, look for every opportunity to create additional flywheels. I mean, what's the flywheel for your career? What's the flywheel for the next 5 years? What's your flywheel in your department? I mean, don't limit this to something that's just at the senior level, but also don't hesitate to get it in place at the senior level. And then number 3 or 4, encourage your team to wake up every day focused on pushing that flywheel. If everybody can see their role in pushing the flywheel, which is part of the test, part of the logic test, everybody needs to see how I got a role in pushing that flywheel. Someday your stock is going to look similar to what's happened to the value of Amazon. So before I take questions, I want to just close with a reminder. I've got a new program I'm kicking off. It's called the Stacked Approach to Scaling Up. It's called the 16-Hour Growth Plan. The next one is May 2nd and 3rd, May 3rd and 4th. There's a dinner the night before May 2nd. And then my next one is going to be in October. So those dates will be coming out. I believe it's the 10th and 11th, but don't quote me on that. We're working on final details on that date. And really, it's bringing the Scaling Up platform together with a great coach in an inspired community where that iron really sharpens the iron. We'll be really focused on creating a collaborative environment, and attendees will walk away with a one-page strategic plan and, of course, a 90-day action plan. So you can find more by scanning that QR code, or you can reach out to me directly, or you can go to riseperformancegroup.com and get more information on the workshop. Let's see here. So, questions. Oh, and this other QR code is to the survey. So I'm going to put the evaluation back in chat. Let me make sure that came through. So it should be in chat. So again, if you would honor me at the bottom of that text I just put into chat is the link to the evaluation. So if you'd honor me with that, I would appreciate it. Okay, so we've got a question. Great presentation and inspiring, not a question, but a comment. One thing Jim talks a lot about, which resonates with me in my area, is accept the brutal truth. When we create the flywheel, don't we forget that? And I would say the answer to that question is no. If you go back to Deb, her number one challenge was getting inspired, passionate teachers. The brutal truth was, when you're in a military town, you've got a lot of transient families that are in and out. Dads are traveling a lot. It's a difficult, I've never had to deal with it. But I've just heard from others that the difficulty of educating those students is if it's challenging in a big city with consistency, it's even more challenging there. So the flywheel was designed to deal with that issue. And I see, why is that coming up? So thanks. Achilles said it's the situational leadership. Yeah, go ahead. I think the title just was wrong on that. It looks like it's a new survey from last month. So yes, Achilles, go ahead and do that. Thank you very much for the question. So Matt, back to your question. So no, I don't think it does. And what I would encourage you to do, if there's friction in your organization, put a step of the flywheel around that. So I'm going to go back to Sidekick. Their number one challenge is right fit partners. So that's number one on the list. Cougar is creating Cougar believers and getting out of the bid market. And so, that's the whole basis of design. So they're measuring the percentage of projects that are basis of design. When they talk about, many of the flywheels have some elements of getting A players in. That means taking responsibility for dealing with A players. So great question. Thanks for asking it. But I would encourage you to look at where your friction is or your challenges in your organization, face those brutal facts, and let's get it documented in our flywheel as a piece that we're going to push going forward. But great question. Okay, who else? Matt had a great question. Achilles had a question. I just want to, maybe a final thought is, the first time you roll this out or the first time you sketch it, it may not be perfect. So play with it. Don't be afraid to play with it. We have a mantra we live by, and that's let's get it down and then get it right. Don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. And again, I just start with what you're striving to be best in the world at, fill the rest of the blanks out in a logical way, and start testing it. And if your successes and failures show it should be something different, change it. If your people say, boss, I don't get it, change it. If, like Matt said, if there's a brutal fact of your business is difficult and it's not documented in the flywheel, let's add it. So there's no right or wrong here, but the idea is if you can get this right, it becomes such a simple way for you to communicate strategy, in such a simple way for you to align your team around something that's so simple. They can wake up every day with a copy of that flywheel in their office or hanging in their cube saying, this is what I'm pounding every day. We're driving this flywheel. And if you do that, I can promise you, you're going to see results. Okay. So another question: with so much change in the world, BHAG feels fuzzy. Do you focus on a 3-year BHAG or still force the 10-year? Great question. In Jim Collins' latest book, Beyond Entrepreneurship, he really expanded on this idea of vision. So what I'm working on with my clients is kind of two elements. One is the vivid description. So what's the word picture of what it's going to look like when you get to the top of the mountain? And then the second is the BHAG, which is how is it measurable? So those are important elements. I I would say most of my clients focus on a 10 to 15 year BHAG. Jim, the way the book, it was originally, it was, I think, a 10 to 25 year, or maybe a 15 to 25 year. I just like 10 to 15 year. I think it's kind of close enough that it's within grasp, but far enough away that it can be used, to inspire. And I'm finding that the words that come out of the vivid description, coupled with a measurable aspect of that, is creating a powerful 1-2 punch. Then I come down to the 3 years. So if we're going to achieve that, what do we need to get done in the next 3 years? And I'll tell you, Achilles, some of my clients in the beginning, they struggle to come up with a BHAG, especially if they've been grinding and haven't been seeing the kind of success they want. They struggle. And I think Cougar would tell you they were in that camp. And then when we got clear when they started seeing the results that came out of turning the flywheel, now all of a sudden their vision is growing big and bold on what they can accomplish. They're like, gosh, Mark, if we can do this in Houston, we could take this throughout Texas, if not throughout the Southwest, if not across the country. So, there's a proverb that says, go as far as you can. When you get there, you'll see more. And I find that to be very true in vision setting. So if we don't get it in the beginning, I just kind of put it on ice. We just look to start getting momentum and then let that momentum kind of fuel the idea of what could be possible, the art of the possible. But great question. Another good question. Okay, we got time for maybe one more. There's got to be another good question amongst all of you that are on today's call. Super smart people. So thank you for attending. All right. Hey, thank you very much for being here today. Keep your eye out for the next workshop. Of course, keep your eye out for the 16-hour growth plan. Call me if you think you've got interest in applying for that. And I look forward to seeing you on the next webinar, if not at the 16-hour growth plan. So have a great day.